Hi ladies, and welcome back to Coffee Corner. You are catching us right in the middle of a Haggai series. So it's not a well-known book. If you've been with us, maybe you've learned something new. You've at least probably dusted off this book that we haven't read in a while. And this is our third lesson from it. Third? Technically fourth with intro. Fourth lesson, and we have this one and one more to go. So I'm really excited to go ahead and dive into today. Warmth, cozy, peace and quiet, calm. We all can use those days. Here we have been getting a lot of snow and ice, so we've been having some very comfy, cozy days inside. You know, not many places to go. We can't really go anywhere because of the ice that's accumulated on everything. And this drink is a Mexican hot chocolate, so that beautiful blend of sweet, spicy, and it's a good break from the sweetness of a normal hot chocolate or a super sugary coffee or from a black coffee. So it's a good in-between mix. But you know, we can all use some calm in our life, and really Haggai is talking about not really a calmness, but a false sense of busyness today in our sermon. If you haven't joined us before, my name is Jarena. This is Coffee Corner, Coffee and Christ, where we just go through and we just have some sit-down talks about my personal devotions, and we just talk real life and how that relates to Scripture. So we're in the middle of a Haggai study, and we are on Haggai's third sermon in his book. So I hope that you will jump in and join us today as we look at considering cleanliness. I don't know about you, but I love schedules, plans, lists, especially when I'm busy. This is just how my life runs, and I'm just constantly, doing things with friends and family, and, when I was at college, classes and church things, and just all this stuff that you have to keep organized and plan everything out, and you just get so busy. And then throughout the busyness of my day, I go to bed and then I remember, I forgot to spend any time with God. No devotions, no prayer. In all of my meticulous planning and all my busyness, I just forgot it again. And even now that my life has slowed down a little bit and I'm not in college and I'm not working on classes, it always seems like spending time with God is the thing that gets pushed back the easiest. It doesn't always get pushed back, but it's the easiest to push back. And this is what Haggai is going to focus on, is busyness or being busy in God's work never equals pure service, or as we're going to look at it because it goes with my title, clean service. And this sermon is a little bit unique in the fact that Haggai is actually speaking to a completely different group of people. Now, it is for everyone in Israel and everyone that's come back, but he's addressing it to a very specific group of people. But before we look at that, let's go ahead and look at our date stamp really quick, because, again, Haggai is always telling us exactly when this is happening. In the verse it says, the 4th and 20th day of the 9th month in the second year of Darius. So, again, probably doesn't mean much to you. It doesn't mean much to me when I'm just reading. I'm like, this is just, a couple months after our last sermon. And this actually, with our calendar, would be December 18th, 520 BC. And as I was writing this down for my notes today, I thought, this is perfect, because when I'm filming this is February, so I've just gotten out of December, out of the Christmas season, and December is one of those times where it's the Christmas season, so we are focused on Christ and his birth, but so often there's so many other activities and so many good other things that we get so busy with that sometimes we just end up really overlooking the reason for the season. And I know to my shame, even this year, as I was looking back, I keep a record of my devotions. Like I write different things down, try to every day, just to help me with that accountability. And as I'm looking back, I'm like, oh, December was probably the month that I did the least in my devotions. And it's that type, I think it's very unique and very ironic that this message was given in December, and it's often the month that I find personally the hardest to stay consistent with my devotions in the busyness of all those other good and festive things. And then we see that Haggai addresses the priests. So this is a different group of people because he has previously addressed the people. He's addressed Zerubbabel, and he's addressed Joshua, which is the high priest, but here he is addressing the priests as a group of people. And really he's addressing the leaders of Israel, because even though they had, while they were a kingdom, an independent kingdom, they had a king, starting with Saul, David, Solomon, and then they split, and now they were under Persian rule. The real leaders of the nation and the intended mouthpieces for God were the priests. They were supposed to lead in worship, because originally, if you look back in Israel's history, Israel actually begins as a theocracy where God is directly ruling them as a people, and the priests are those people that are carrying out his commands. They're teaching the people, and that's sort of that's their role, is to communicate what God has given, got his word, to the people. But as we saw, Israel has kings later on, and this is from their demand to want to be like everyone else, and it is so dangerous. It's a dangerous position to desire to, sort of blend in with the world. They had God as their leader, God as their king, but they just wanted to be like everyone else. And I don't know, as I said it just sort of sounded so funny that they had God ruling, the wisest, most powerful being in the universe, and they wanted some guy to be the head of their country. And it's my prayer, really, that God saves us as individuals and also as the church from just, blending in and adopting all those themes and methods and messages of the world, and staying unlike Israel, completely sanctified and set apart for God. And that is the theme that is going to come across in Haggai, is being set apart from God and what that should look like in our daily lives. And he presents them with these questions. So we look at who he's talking to, and now we get into the what in verse 12. He has two questions, and at first it sounds like he's just quizzing these priests about their knowledge of the law. And as priests, they should know these questions. These should be very easy questions, but he's just getting their minds to think. He says, if one bear holy flesh in the skirt of his garment, and with his skirt do touch bread, or pottage, or wine, or oil, or any meat, shall it be holy? And the priests answered and said, no. So his first question is talking about holy to unholy. So if we look back in Deuteronomy, and we're not going to flip back there and read specific verses, but Deuteronomy, Leviticus, all those books that gave the law, it talks about how certain things for temple worship were considered holy and clean, and other things were not considered holy and clean. And the dishes that were used in the temple, the clothing of the priests were, sanctified. They were cleansed so that they were ready for service in the temple. And Leviticus sets forth all these rules and regulations to make them holy. And then God's asking them, if you have something that's holy, so something that's been cleansed, something that's been set apart, especially for God's work, it's been purified, and it comes into contact with something that is not holy or purified or cleansed, does that automatically make that unclean thing clean? And the priests say, no, that's not how it works. You have to, there's a very specific process for making something clean, making something special and set apart for God's service. And I think maybe a good illustration that I have come across is, my grandmother had a very nice set of china that as grandkids we were not allowed to touch. I don't know if we ever used them. We might have used them like at Christmas or Thanksgiving or something, but I don't really remember. But generally speaking, those were set apart. Those were put aside for a very special occasion, for special times of service. If it was most of the time when we were up there, we just used Tupperware cups and plates and the older stuff, the things that were suitable for that everyday single use. And that's what these garments and these priestly things were. They were very, like that fine china, those things that were set aside for a specific time. It's not that those items in and of themselves were holy, it's just that they were set apart for a very special time and place and purpose. And again, God's asking them, okay, so if the china plate and the Rubbermaid plate, you touch them together, it doesn't automatically make it special. If you put the Tupperware in with the china, it doesn't make it special. It does. The contact of priestly garments did not give the common food any special significance. It was common food for general consumption, and holiness could not be transferred. And if we look at it today, in just a general application today, is our holiness cannot be transferred. Our holiness that's found in God. If your parents were saved and knew the Lord, that doesn't automatically transfer to you. Holiness, salvation is a very personal thing, and it's a process. It's a personal decision to be made by you. It's not holiness is not transferable. And then he asks a question concerning unclean touching something that's clean. He says, if one that is unclean by a dead body touch any of these, shall it be unclean? And the priest answers and said, it shall be unclean. So where holiness can't be transferred to something that is unholy or unclean, something that is dirty, something that's common or unclean, can contaminate that which has been holy or that which has been clean. And the priests readily acknowledge this. It's like they just snap back with the answer because they know it. It's something that's ingrained in them. And, just like when you combine dirt and water, the water doesn't, make the dirt clean. The dirt makes the water muddy. And this is the same idea as something that's polluted and dirty instantly pollutes the thing which is holy. Cleanliness is an all or nothing thing. You can't be partially clean or partially dirty. If you get mud on a special piece of clothing or a special pair of shoes, they're dirty. You put them aside, you go clean them because they're not really presentable anymore because they've gotten just maybe a little bit of mud on them, but they're no longer clean. You would consider them dirty. And it's like that with our lives with God. We cannot give God only parts of our lives and keep other parts of our lives to ourselves. It's an all or nothing thing. God wants everyone or all that we are. And we can't hide these little parts of our lives away and keep them to ourselves and be like, well, I'll just indulge that little sin or that little fantasy. No, God wants everything that we are. And he's asking these questions to these priests to get their minds thinking. And he asks them first about the transferring of holiness, but that he's working to this question of, well, okay, let's look at the reverse then. Clean, dirty does pollute clean. And now he goes into these considerations. We looked in chapter 1 about how consider and the consider sermon that we've probably already heard. Well, here he's going to ask them to consider many other things. He says, and now I pray you consider from this day forward, let me start in verse 14. Then answered Haggai and said, so it is with this people. And so is this nation before me, saith the Lord, and so is every work of their hands, and that which they offer is unclean. So he's saying, just like, and you know this, just like you, if something unclean, something dirty touches something that's holy, set apart, sanctified, it's completely polluted, it has to be gotten rid of or repurified. This is what this people is like. They have indulged in sin, they have forgotten me, but they're still practicing. Their outside works look good, but their heart is corrupt, and their priorities aren't there. That's going back to that first chapter where we see that people are building their own houses but not building the temple. Well, we're still sort of dealing with that problem, and in Haggai you'll see this a lot where it's reoccurring in its themes. He'll keep touching on the issues that he touches on sort of in the big arena in the first chapter. He starts digging away at those tiny little parts. And it's not just that some of their work is polluted, it's every single part of their work. Again, that dirt and water. The dirt completely pollutes. The water doesn't stay contained to just one little single area. It was completely polluting their work. And we cannot talk good things. We're really, really good at this. We're good at talking church and acting church like when we're in church. And then we completely live another way, maybe outside of church, or even just in little tiny areas when we're with certain people, or we're in a certain environment, we don't, we're not reflecting Christ. We can't say that we live a pure, holy, clean, pure life for God. Those sinful attitudes and actions and motives touch our entire service for God, and other people may not see that, but God sees it, and he says that area of your life is rendering, and I'm very careful with how I'm saying this, is rendering those other parts of your service unclean. Not completely useless, because God can use anyone's works and anyone doing anything to change lives and to forward his work, but it does taint all those other parts of his lives. And I know recently when I'm filming this video, we've just had some news come out about a Christian leader who passed away, who had a very secret and tainted life in other areas of his life, and now that is tainting his entire life's work, his ministry. And that's what Haggai is saying. He's saying you can't just have this little secret part of your life without it messing up, without it tainting and dirtying the rest of your life, and your service is going to be tainted. Holiness and sinfulness can't be compartmentalized. We cannot claim a clean life if sin characterizes it. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean we're not going to sin or we're not going to mess up, but it cannot be a life that is harboring sin. It's not a clean life. And God points this out, and God points out consequences. He's like, okay, I just want you to consider this, and this is where all the considerateness come in. He says in verse 15, and now I pray you consider from this day up and upward, from before a stone was laid upon a stone in the temple. So he's talking about prior to chapter 1. He's going back in time. He's like, remember how it was like when you were just focused on yourselves. Since those days were when one came to an heap of 20 measures, but there were 10, and when one came to a press fat for to draw out 50 vessels out of the press, but there was 20. I smote you with blastings and with mildew and with hail and all labors of your hands. Yet ye turn not to me, saith the Lord. So he's saying, remember what your life was like when you didn't have these priorities, when you were focused on other things and you weren't doing my work, and the emptiness of busyness. And we looked at this in our first look at Haggai's first sermon, so I'm not really going to reiterate on it too much. But, they were busy trying to get food, trying to build their houses, and they never seemed to be able to get ahead. And they couldn't, it says, when they went, they were expecting this much, and they only got, half of as many as they thought they were going to, and they just were feeling disappointed and frustrated. And it was just this sting of emptiness and of loss, because they were saying all the right things. They were saying that they loved God, but their lives were showing something different. And then he's saying, this is empty, and it's also unproductive. They're planting all these things. It says, I smote you with blasting and with mildew and with hail. So they're working really hard. It's not that they're not working hard. They're working hard, but it's on their own things, and they're not doing what God wanted them to do. So God's like, no, you're not going to get the satisfaction of profiting from neglect of me. And I think, our lives a lot of times want to reflect Israel's wrong priorities. We stay busy with so many things and really good things, but we neglect the most important things. We neglect that time with God. We neglect praying and reading His Word, and we feel empty, we feel unproductive, or we're harboring some hypocrisy. Our lives say, our lips say one thing, but our lives say something completely different. And clean service really begins with fellowship with God, and that's not just something we can have on Sundays or whenever we're in church, or whenever we're, maybe online in church. We can have fellowship all the time, and that comes from spending time with God. And then outflowing our fellowship with God comes a beautiful, pure, clean service for Him. And then Haggai goes on and looks at the conclusions. So consider conclusions. Because again, verse 18 starts with consider. Consider now from this day upward. So he's saying, okay, look back and up to the point where you got right with me. Now he says, okay, look from this day and continue looking. From the 24th day of the 9th month, so right now, even from the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider it. Is the seed yet in the barn? Yea, as the vine and the fig tree and the pomegranate and the olive tree hath not brought forth, from this day will I bless you. Now, he's saying you finally got your priorities right in service. You are providing for your family, yes, but you're also prioritizing time with me. And for them, it was building the temple. And this cleanliness in their service and this shift in priorities is encouraged. God's saying, okay, look, you did what was right. You followed what I wanted you to do. Now look at the results. He's saying, this day forward, I am going to bless you. And there's just a fullness in service. Now they are busy. They're probably busier than they were before, because they're now focusing on God's work, and they still have to provide for their family and, meet other individual needs and, work in their community and everything else. But there's just an overwhelming fullness. You have the pomegranate tree and the fig tree and the vine and the olive tree. They're producing, they're giving nourishment, and God is blessing their service, because now they've completely dedicated what they're doing to God. They're living a completely, there's a specific word I'm looking for and it's eluding me, but a life that is the same across the board. Wherever you're looking, it's not just lip service anymore. It's a holistic lifestyle of serving and loving God. And God is giving them these very specific blessings and very specific physical blessings that they're going to see, because this goes back to Leviticus, Deuteronomy, the blessings and the curses that He was going to give Israel as a nation. And just as we aren't Israel as believers, so we're not under the same restrictions and rules as Israel was. We can't lay claim to those specific physical blessings and promises, but that doesn't mean believers aren't going to experience God's blessings when we present Him, with clean service and a clean and consecrated life. In Romans 12, Paul is exhorting us to, give our bodies as holy and acceptable sacrifices. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words. And what's the result of doing this? And Paul goes on to say, to prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. When our lives are clean, or, as Paul's describing it, perfect, holy and acceptable, we're able to experience a very good and very acceptable and perfect will of God in full. As believers, we have the promise of heaven, but we can live daily. We want to live that daily cleanliness, that daily fullness of God's blessing and God's will in all of its clarity. And this may not be a rich and prosperous life. We're not, health and wealth people, but we don't do service for God. And Paul says that it's our reasonable service, our expected service. And sometimes, that sort of hits us and we're like, well, maybe I don't see it that it's reasonable and acceptable. But when we're looking at what Christ has done for us, it really is whatever He asks. But we can look forward to the results of offering God clean service. We get this clarity in our walk with the Lord. We have the joy of the Lord and the strength of the Lord as we walk from day to day. And it's so wonderful. And maybe this sounds a little repetitive from this first sermon, and in some ways it is. He's chipping away at it. He's saying, okay, we looked at your actions, now let's look at your heart. And okay, we've looked at our actions, our outward things. Let's look at our heart today. Let's see if we're serving God with a whole heart. Are we experiencing the joy and the fullness of the will of God in our day-to-day life and walk? There's a song, Trust and Obey. It was pretty popular where I came from and singing it. It says, trust and obey. When we walk with the Lord, I'm going to read it. When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. There is joy and fullness in living a clean and consecrated life for God. And I hope that today you are beginning to experience that joy and that fullness. All right, so we have one more week in Haggai, and I hope you guys will join us then to look at the last sermon, which is a little bit different than the other sermons that we've looked at. So I hope that it's good. I know this one was a little bit repetitive maybe with our first sermon in Haggai, but I hope that was an encouragement to you nevertheless. And I'm actually going to link a link to another video that I have found helpful. It's just a very quick overview of the book of Haggai. It's sort of done like a sketch artist fashion, but I really like it and I found it helpful just to give me a good overview. And if you guys want to, or you guys haven't been here for the rest of our lessons, you can jump over there and watch it quick, because that will be much quicker than listening through all of the other lessons. But I mean, if you have time, listen to the other lessons. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and ring the bell. Subscribing just lets me know that you guys are interested, and I will keep producing more content. And I will also link some videos, other videos of mine, to the end of this video as well. So I hope you guys have a great weekend and beginning of your week next week, and join me next Friday for the last of our Haggai sermons. Bye.